Greetings to you, my dear listeners. Tonight, we are going to take a journey through one of the most fascinating mysteries of our time, the question of what is reality and whether we can be sure of the authenticity of our existence. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. Silence envelops your house, and only the faint hum of the nighttime city can be heard somewhere far away. You lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly you have a strange thought. What if all this is just an illusion? What if what you call reality is really just a reflection of something else? These are not new questions. They have plagued philosophers for millennia, from ancient thinkers who pondered the nature of existence to modern scientists who seriously discuss the possibility that our universe may be a giant computer program. Tonight, in this silence of the night, you and I will take a journey through one of the most exciting yet disturbing ideas of our time, the simulation hypothesis. This concept, which once seemed to belong exclusively to the world of science fiction, is now gaining more and more serious scientific and philosophical ground. And the deeper we delve into it, the more blurred the line becomes between what we believe to be real and what may turn out to be only a very convincing imitation of reality. Let's start at the beginning. What is the simulation hypothesis? It is based on a simple but dizzying idea. Our reality may be an artificially created simulation run by some super powerful computer or simulator. We, the people living inside this simulation, may be completely unaware of its unreality, just as the characters in a computer game are unaware that their world has been created by programmers. This idea did not arise from nothing. It has its roots in deep philosophical reflections on the nature of reality. But it took its modern form through the work of thinkers such as Hans Moravec, and especially Nick Bostrom. It was Bostrom who formulated what is now called the trilemma of simulation, logical reasoning that confronts us with three possibilities, of which at least one must be true. But before we delve into the logical arguments, let me tell you how this idea matured in the minds of mankind. You see, the question of the nature of reality has always been central to human consciousness. Even the ancient philosophers wondered, can we be sure that our senses are not deceiving us? Are the images we see just shadows on a cave wall, as Plato suggested? In more recent times, French philosopher René Descartes proposed a mental experiment with an evil demon who could trick us into experiencing false sensations. And in the 20th century, this idea was transformed into the brain in a flask hypothesis. Imagine your brain is removed from your body and placed in a nutrient medium, and electrodes stimulated so that you continue to experience all the same sensations as before. How would you know if you were just a brain in a flask. But the technological advances of our time have given these ancient philosophical conundrums a whole new dimension. When we see how rapidly computer technology is developing, how our games are becoming more and more realistic, how artificial intelligence is beginning to rival the human mind, the idea that our reality could be a simulation no longer seems like pure fantasy. Imagine that 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now, humanity, or some other intelligent civilization, will have reached such a level of technological development that it will be able to create absolutely convincing simulations of reality. Simulations so detailed and complex that the beings living in them will not be able to distinguish them from true reality. If such simulations are possible, it is logical to assume that many will be created, because when we have a powerful tool, we tend to use it over and over again. Now ask yourself, if there is one base reality and thousands or millions of simulations, what is the probability that you are living in the base reality and not in one of the simulations? The maths here is ruthless. If there are more simulated realities than non-simulated realities, then it is statistically more likely that we are living in a simulation. This reasoning is at the heart of the technological singularity argument. The idea is that if advanced civilizations are capable of creating perfect simulations, then there must be a huge number of such simulations. And if so, then we are more likely to be inhabitants of one of the simulations than of the only real reality. But there are other arguments that make us seriously consider this possibility. One of them is related to the so-called fine-tuning of the physical constants of our universe. Scientists have long noticed that the fundamental constants of nature, the speed of light, the electron charge, Planck's constant, and many others, have exactly those values that are necessary for the existence of complex structures and ultimately life. Change any of these constants even slightly, and stars would not be able to form, atoms would not be stable, and chemical reactions would be impossible. Some physicists call this striking coincidence the anthropic principle, suggesting that we observe a universe suitable for life precisely because in an unsuitable universe there would be no observers. But there is another explanation. What if these constants are not random, but deliberately set? What if someone adjusted the parameters of our simulated universe so that life could arise in it? Of course, this is not proof of a simulation, but it does raise the question of how natural the conditions of our existence are. Another argument leads us to consider the plurality of universes. Modern cosmology seriously considers the possibility of the existence of a multiverse, an infinite number of universes with different physical laws and constants. If the multiverse is real, it may represent something like a giant computer system, where each universe is a separate program or simulation. In such a world picture, the distinction between real and simulated universes can lose all meaning. All of them are equally real or equally unreal, depending on the point of view. And perhaps evolution in such a multiverse works not only at the biological level, but also at the level of the universes themselves. Successful, stable realities continue to exist and give rise to new variations, while unsuccessful ones disappear. But let's turn away from these karmic scales for a moment and turn to something closer and more intimate: our own consciousness. One of the most striking arguments in favor of simulation comes from an analysis of how we perceive reality. Think about it. Everything you know about the world comes to you through your senses. But these senses convert physical phenomena, light waves, sound vibrations, chemical molecules, into electrical signals that your brain interprets as visual images, sounds, smells, and tastes. In essence, your brain creates a model of reality based on these electrical impulses. But if all our perception is based on the interpretation of electrical signals, what difference does it make where these signals come from? From real photons reflected from real objects, or from a skillfully created computer program? If the simulation is detailed enough to generate all the necessary signals at the right time and in the right sequence, it will be absolutely indistinguishable from reality for your consciousness. Moreover, the subjectivity of our perception makes it inherently something of a personal simulation. What you see as the color green may be perceived by another person in a completely different way, but they will call it by the same word: green. We can never directly compare our inner experiences, and in that sense, we are each locked into our own subjective reality. Even dreams can serve as an analogy for simulation. When you sleep, your brain creates convincing experiences out of nothing. You see places that don't exist, communicate with people who aren't there, experience emotions that seem absolutely real. It's only when you wake up that you realize it was all just a game of your mind. But while you were asleep, these experiences were completely real to you. Dream studies show us how easily the mind can be deceived. In dreams, we take the most absurd situations for granted, fail to notice logical contradictions, and are not surprised by impossible transformations. Our critical mind seems to switch off, allowing us to fully immerse ourselves in an alternative reality. What if the waking state is simply a more stable and consistent form of sleep? What if the difference between dream and reality lies not in their ontological status, but only in the degree of coherence and predictability of the narrative? Some thinkers go even further, arguing that there is no reason to believe that simulation is not a natural state of reality. Perhaps the very idea of a basic reality is an illusion born of our need for a foundation, something absolutely certain and unchanging. But if we seriously consider the possibility that we are living in a simulation, we should also look for potential signs of this. Just as computer programs sometimes fail, the simulation of our reality could also exhibit some artifacts of its digital nature. Maybe the speed of light is not a fundamental limitation of physics, but merely the maximum speed of information processing in the system that simulates our universe. Maybe quantum uncertainty arises because the system does not calculate exact values of all particle parameters until we try to measure them. Just as a computer game does not draw details of distant objects until the player gets close to them, some physicists are seriously looking for signs of pixelization of space-time at the smallest scales, discreteness that could give away the digital nature of our reality. Others are investigating possible rounding off in physical constants or anomalies in cosmic microwave radiation that could indicate limitations in the computational power of a hypothetical simulator. But even if such signs are found, they will not be definitive proof of simulation. After all, any observations we can make are by definition within our reality, simulated or not. If we are really living in a simulation, then all our instruments, all our measurements, all our theories are part of that simulation. Here we encounter one of the most serious objections to the simulation hypothesis: the problem of falsifiability. Karl Popper argued that a scientific theory must be fundamentally refutable. There must be a possibility of experiment or observation that could disprove it. But how can we disprove a simulation hypothesis if any data we obtain may be part of the simulation itself? However, is it fair to apply Popper's criterion to a philosophical hypothesis? After all, the simulation hypothesis is not so much a scientific theory in the narrow sense as a metaphysical statement about the nature of reality. And like any metaphysical statement, it can be useful for thinking about the world, even if it cannot be proved or disproved empirically. Moreover, Occam's principle, favoring simpler explanations over complex ones, can both support and refute the simulation hypothesis. On the one hand, the simulation assumption adds an extra layer of complexity. Instead of a single reality, we postulate the existence of an underlying reality plus a simulation. On the other hand, given the subjective nature of our perception, simulation may be the most natural explanation of how consciousness works. But let's move away from purely logical arguments and turn to how the idea of simulation manifests itself in our culture and affects our understanding of ourselves. After all, the simulation hypothesis is not just an abstract philosophical concept. It reflects profound changes in the way we understand reality in the digital age. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard predicted at the end of the 20th century that the era of total simulation was coming. He argued that in the postmodern world, reality is increasingly replaced by its simulacra, copies without the original, signs that no longer refer to any authentic reality. Baudrillard described 4 stages in the development of the simulacrum. First, the simulacrum reflects the basic reality, like a map reflects a territory. Then it masks and denatures reality, like a map that hides some details of the territory. In the third stage, the simulacrum masks the absence of reality, like a map of a territory that no longer exists. Finally, in the fourth stage, the simulacrum becomes a pure simulacrum that no longer relates to any reality, like a map of a territory that no longer exists. In Baudrillard's world, we live in an era of hyperreality, a reality generated by models, matrices, and databanks. This hyperreality is populated by the images of contemporary culture, which carry nothing but a reminder of values without affecting their content. Here, effects precede causes, and simulacra take on a life of their own, independent of any original reality. Isn't that the world we live in today? Social media creates versions of ourselves that can be more real to others than our physical personality. News is increasingly becoming not a reflection of events, but the events themselves. Financial markets react to rumors and expectations that themselves create economic reality. Politicians live in a world of opinion polls, which they themselves shape with their statements. In this context, the hypothesis of simulation ceases to be an exotic philosophical speculation and becomes a description of our everyday reality. We already live in a world of simulations. The only question that remains is how deeply this simulation penetrates into the very fabric of being. And here it is important to understand the difference between simulation and simple manipulation or deception. In manipulation, there is a true reality that is hidden or distorted. In simulation, on the other hand, there is no hidden truth. It creates its own reality that is outside the dichotomy of true and false. Modern mass media create what can be called the world of the screen. The screens of our phones, computers, and TVs become windows into fictitious realities that are transmitted into our consciousness. And the more time we spend in these screen worlds, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish the real from the artificial. But screens are just the beginning. Advances in virtual and augmented reality technology promise to create even more convincing simulations. Already today, VR headsets can trick our senses so convincingly that we begin to physically react to virtual objects. And tomorrow, neural interfaces may allow us to directly stimulate our brains, creating experiences indistinguishable from the real thing. In this perspective, the boundary between the real and the virtual is not just blurred. It may disappear altogether. And perhaps this is not a problem to be solved, but a new reality to be adapted to. Modeling has always been an important method of human cognition. We study complex systems by building simplified models of them. We predict the future by building models of possible scenarios. We understand the past by creating historical reconstructions. In a sense, all our knowledge of the world is modeling. We replace real objects with their images in our minds. Computer technology has immeasurably expanded our modeling capabilities. We can create virtual worlds with their own physical laws, populate them with artificial beings, and observe the evolution of complex systems. Virtual modeling has an amazing cognitive power. It allows us to explore different variants of events, to play out alternative scenarios, to study systems under conditions impossible in the real world. But the more perfect our models become, the more difficult it becomes to draw the line between model and reality. If a model reproduces all the observable properties of a system, in what sense is it not a system? This problem is particularly acute in the context of modeling consciousness. If we create a computer model of a human brain that behaves exactly like a real brain, will it possess consciousness? And if it claims to possess consciousness, how can we verify the truth of this claim? Here we come to one of the deepest problems in the philosophy of consciousness, the problem of other minds. We cannot directly observe the consciousness of other people. We can only infer its existence from behavior and self-reports. But if behavior and self-reports can be simulated by a computer, how does computer consciousness differ from biological consciousness? Or maybe there is no difference? Perhaps consciousness is not a special property of biological systems, but a general principle of information organization that can be implemented in any sufficiently complex system. In this case, simulated consciousness would not be a copy of real consciousness, but another form of its manifestation. This idea is closely related to Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis. Tegmark suggests that physical reality is nothing but a mathematical structure. All objects that we consider physical, electrons, atoms, stars, planets, are actually mathematical entities, elements of some gigantic mathematical system. If Tegmark is right, then the distinction between simulation and reality becomes completely meaningless. After all, what is computer simulation but the performance of mathematical calculations? If reality itself is mathematical, then its simulation will not be a copy of reality. but another way of realizing the same mathematical structure. In this perspective, our universe could be one of many mathematical structures, each of which is equally real. We could call some of these structures natural and others artificial, but this distinction would be more a matter of terminology than a fundamental ontological fact. But even if we are not ready to accept such a radical mathematical picture of the world, the development of technology inevitably raises questions about the nature of reality and our place in it. The transhumanist movement sees technology as an opportunity to radically improve human nature. Its supporters dream of creating a post-human, a being with improved mental and physical abilities, perfect memory, absence of disease and aging, unlimited youth and energy. Transhumanism is based on the idea of NBIC convergence, the fusion of nanotechnology, biotechnology, information, and cognitive technologies. This convergence may lead to the creation of a new civilization where the boundaries between biological and artificial, real and virtual, become indistinguishable. Imagine a future where your consciousness can be uploaded into a computer, where you can live in virtual worlds indistinguishable from reality, where your personality can exist simultaneously in multiple copies, exploring different possibilities. In such a world, the question of which reality is real would lose all meaning. But the transhumanist utopia has a dark side. Critics warn of the possibility of creating a more hierarchical and conflictual world where improved humans will dominate over ordinary humans. They fear the loss of the notion of the universal and the establishment of a soft tyranny of the technological elite. Indeed, if reality becomes programmable, who will control the program? If our experiences can be artificially created, how will we be able to distinguish genuine emotions from imposed ones? If our memory can be altered, how will we maintain our identity? These questions are no longer purely theoretical. Already today, we see how social networks influence our mood and behavior, how algorithms shape our preferences and beliefs, how virtual worlds of computer games become places where people spend a significant part of their lives. Computer games deserve special attention in the context of our conversation. They represent, perhaps, the most compelling form of simulation available to us today. In games, we can take on the roles of other beings, explore fantastic worlds, and experience adventures not possible in ordinary life. Play, in the philosophical sense, is a person's free self-expression, implying openness to the world of the possible. It can be recognizable but unrecognizable, simultaneously substantive and superficial. In virtual space, play becomes a way of constructing thoughts and searching for the meaning of life. Virtualization has radically changed the phenomenon of play. creating a new space with its own laws and chronotope. In virtual worlds, time can flow differently. Space can have different dimensions. Causality can obey different rules. And the more we immerse ourselves in these worlds, the more they influence our perception of ordinary reality. Cinema, in turn, has been constructing social reality for more than a century, creating the illusion of authenticity of what is happening on the screen. Modern special effects are aimed at the most realistic depiction of the unreal, evoking the viewer's faith and creating a reality effect for temporary living in the created world. Anti-utopian films such as The Matrix foreshadowed many of the issues we discuss today. In this film, humanity lives in a total simulation created by artificial intelligence, and only a select few know the truth about the nature of reality. The Matrix has become a powerful metaphor for our time, a time when the lines between the real and the virtual are becoming increasingly blurred. But perhaps the most profound influence on our perception of reality is not cinema or games, but information technology in general. We live in an information society dominated by information, symbols, ideas, and images. This has given birth to the digital generation, which from childhood gets used to a dense flow of information and needs a constant online presence. Information and communication technologies radically transform our perception of time. They create a sense of instantaneity of existence, disrupt the coherence of temporal modus operandi, past, present, and future, and reduce the time perspective. Time begins to be perceived as a trap, as a thief of time resources, which leads to media addiction. Douglas Rushkoff described the phenomenon of present shock, a panic, pathological reaction to living in a world where everything is happening at once. In such a world, narrative is disrupted. Digiphrenia, the simultaneous existence of a person in different media spaces, manifests itself, and a strange desire for completions in the infinite present arises. Excessive use of information and communication technologies can lead to psychological addiction when multimedia becomes a substitute for real life and a way of escaping reality. But what is real life in a world where most of our communication takes place through screens, where our work can take place entirely in digital space, where our entertainment, shopping, even romantic relationships are mediated by technology? The psychophysiological risks of this new reality are already well documented. Musculoskeletal problems, visual impairment, technological stress, memory decline, sleep disorders. But even more serious may be the changes in the very structure of our consciousness. In virtual space, a person can create any image, change age, gender, status. This gives freedom of communication, but it also creates an imaginary identity. The problem is that our nervous system is not always able to distinguish between real and imaginary situations, which leads to the merging of physical and non-physical space and time. The phenomenon of temporal schizophrenia arises. The inability to synchronize real and virtual time, which can lead to the inability of the psyche to form a complete image of its own I. A person begins to live in multiple time streams, each of which has its own logic and requirements. And yet, the material life of the body continues to take place in the constant world. This is perhaps the last criterion for distinguishing between realities. The body starves, gets tired, ages regardless of the virtual worlds in which the consciousness wanders. But even this criterion may be temporary. The development of biotechnologies and neurointerfaces may eventually make bodily sensations programmable. The constant clouding of the mind by media can impair self-knowledge. Media-dependent people are often unable to adequately and rationally model their future, expecting goods to appear on their own. They live in a perpetual present where each moment demands immediate gratification, but offers no lasting meaning. But perhaps this is not degradation, but adaptation to a new reality. Perhaps linear time and stable identity were only artifacts of the industrial age, and a networked, multiple, fluid existence is more in keeping with the nature of consciousness. In this context, virtual communities emerge, networks of interpersonal connections that provide social interaction, support, and a sense of belonging. They differ from real communities by the textual form of communication, the ability to construct new rules, and virtually unlimited freedom of speech. Some of these communities evolve into cyberstates or micronations, virtual but potentially sovereign states that are not tied to territory and are created in the space of communication. They can mimic the trappings of a state, starting as a game that can grow into a full-fledged society if it becomes more meaningful to the participants than a regular society. The Cyber Religion Manifesto describes cyberspace as a world where individuals have no bodies, thus avoiding coercion and racial or economic prejudice. In such a world, the only currency is ideas. The only weapon is argument. The only power is consensus. Of course, cyberstates are not yet internationally recognized. But what if, in the future, virtual communities become more important to people than geographical ones? What if loyalty to an online community is stronger than patriotism to the country of birth? We are already seeing the rudiments of this process. People find their identity in social networks, professional platforms, game guilds. They are willing to spend time, energy, and money to maintain relationships with people they have never seen in the physical world. For many, virtual friends become closer than housemates. And here we come to another dimension of the simulation hypothesis, the social dimension. Perhaps it is not only a matter of whether physical reality is simulated, but also how simulated our social relations, our emotions, our culture are. Social networks create the illusion of communication. But this communication is mediated by algorithms that decide what information we see, who we interact with, what is considered important or unimportant. These algorithms shape our preferences, our beliefs, our behavior in ways we are often unaware of. Consensus reality. What people believe to be real on the basis of agreement or consensus is increasingly shaped not by direct human interaction, but by mediators in the form of technological platforms. Different communities consuming different media content may have radically different perceptions of reality. Social reality, which exists due to the interaction of people in society and is shaped by language as a system of accepted symbols, is also undergoing profound changes. The language of the internet, emoji, memes create new forms of meaning-making that may not be understood by older generations. Intentionality of consciousness, the ability of the human brain to imagine objects and states of the world differently than they actually are, in the digital age gets new tools and new possibilities. We can not only imagine alternative realities, but also create them, share them with others, and live in them. In this sense, the simulation hypothesis may not be so much a question about the metaphysical nature of reality as a description of how human consciousness is organized in principle. Perhaps we have always lived in simulations, first in myths and religions, then in ideologies and national narratives, now in digital technologies. And maybe that's not a problem, but a feature. Perhaps the ability to create and inhabit alternate realities is what makes us human. Homo sapiens is a thinking person, but also an imagining person, a simulating person. If so, the question is not whether we live in a simulation, but which simulations we choose, how we construct them, how they affect us, and how we can affect them. The question is whether our simulations make us more human or less human, whether they empower us or limit us. Here it is important to recall the concept of the life world, the sum of immediate evidences that shape human orientation and behavior. This is the pre-philosophical and pre-scientific basis of consciousness, the realm of certainties accepted without proof. Our life world today is inextricably linked to technology. The smartphone has become an extension of our memory. The internet, a source of knowledge. Social media, a way to maintain relationships. We don't think about how these technologies work. We just use them as a natural part of our existence. And there's nothing unusual about that. The life world has always consisted of things taken on faith. Primitive man did not analyze the nature of fire, but used it to cook food. The medieval peasant did not study botany, but knew when to sow grain. A modern city dweller does not understand the structure of a car, but drives it every day. Problems arise when our life world begins to contradict itself, when different parts of it offer incompatible pictures of reality. This is what is happening today. The physical world tells us one thing, the digital world another, and we find ourselves torn between the two. The subjective reality created by our consciousness has always been closed to the subject. But today, this closedness has taken on a new dimension. Personalization algorithms create for each user a unique information environment, a personal version of reality adapted to their preferences and beliefs. This can lead to the fragmentation of society into many isolated information bubbles, each of which lives in its own version of reality. And if these versions become too different, public dialogue, democratic process, and scientific discourse become impossible. On the other hand, the opposite trend, homogenization of consciousness under the influence of global media platforms, is also possible. If all people consume the same content generated by the same algorithms, their thinking may become too similar, which also carries its own risks. Media hygiene is becoming a new form of self-care. Just as we look after our physical health by controlling our diet and exercise, we need to look after our information health by controlling the sources of information and the time we spend in digital environments. But are individual efforts enough? Perhaps we need new social institutions, new forms of collective reflection, new ways of distinguishing between useful and harmful simulations. And here we return to the philosophical dimension of our topic. The simulation hypothesis raises fundamental questions, not only about the nature of reality, but also about the nature of knowledge, truth, and meaning. If we really live in a simulation, what does this mean for our scientific theories? Do they describe the laws of underlying reality, or just the rules of the simulation? And is there a difference if the simulation is reasonably consistent and predictable? What does this mean for our ethical beliefs? If other people are simulated beings, do they have moral status? And if I myself am simulated, am I responsible for my actions? What does this mean for our understanding of the meaning of life? Can a simulated life be as valuable as a real life? Or is simulation by definition devoid of authenticity and therefore of meaning? These questions have no easy answers, but perhaps asking them helps us to better understand what we value in life, what we consider important, what we want to preserve in a world that is rapidly changing under the influence of technology. One possible consequence of the simulation hypothesis is that it may free us from some illusions. If reality can be simulated, then our notions of natural and artificial, genuine and fake need to be revised. Perhaps what matters is not whether our reality is simulated, but how we live in it. What matters is our relationships with others, our creative endeavors, our capacity for compassion and understanding. These things can be equally valuable regardless of the metaphysical status of the world in which they occur. At the same time, the simulation hypothesis can inspire us to be more responsible with technology. If we realize that we live in a world of simulations, we can be more conscious about creating and using them. We can ask ourselves what kind of simulations we want to create, what values they should embody, how they should affect us and our children. The simulation hypothesis can also help us better understand the nature of consciousness. If consciousness can exist in simulation, it may be a more fundamental aspect of reality than we have thought. Perhaps consciousness is not a product of matter, but a basic characteristic of information processes. In this perspective, the distinction between biological and artificial intelligence may be less important than we thought. Perhaps both are different ways of organizing consciousness, different forms of its manifestation in the world. And if so, the emergence of artificial intelligence may not be a threat to humanity, but its continuation, the next stage in the evolution of consciousness. Perhaps the future belongs not to humans or machines, but to new forms of hybrid consciousness that will combine the best characteristics of biological and digital thinking. But these considerations take us far into the future. And what can we do here and now with the realization that reality may be more complex and ambiguous than we thought? Firstly, we can develop critical thinking, the ability to distinguish between different levels of reality, to understand how our perceptions are shaped by technology and media. This does not mean a paranoid distrust of everything, but an awareness of the choice of information sources and digital tools. Second, we can cultivate attention to direct experience, to what is happening here and now, in our bodies, in our relationships, in our surroundings. Whatever the metaphysical status of this experience, it remains the basis of our existence. Thirdly, we can develop the capacity for creativity and play by understanding them as fundamental ways of interacting with reality. If we live in a world of simulations, our ability to create new simulations, inhabit them with meaning, and share them with others becomes especially important. Fourth, we can strive for authenticity in our relationships with others, realizing that human connection can be one of the few things that remain real, regardless of context. Empathy, love, compassion. These experiences can be equally deep and meaningful in any reality. Finally, we can accept uncertainty as an inevitable part of human existence. Perhaps we will never know for sure whether we are living in a simulation or not. Perhaps this question has no definitive answer in principle, but that does not mean it is not worth asking. Philosophical questions are valuable not only for their answers, but also for the way they change us as we think about them. Thinking about the simulation hypothesis can make us more open to alternative possibilities, more tolerant of uncertainty, more responsible in our relationship with technology. And perhaps that is the main value of this idea. Not to give us a definitive answer about the nature of reality, but to help us better understand ourselves and the world in which we live. The night is coming to an end, and the first rays of dawn come through the windows. You lie in bed, thinking about what you have heard. Perhaps you feel that the world is even more mysterious than it was an hour ago. Perhaps you feel a little dizzy with the realization that reality may not be as you imagined it. But there is also something liberating about this insight. If the boundaries of reality are not as rigid as we thought, then perhaps the boundaries of the possible are wider than we thought. If we live in a world of simulations, we have the power to influence those simulations, to participate in their creation, to choose those that make us more human. The sun rises over the horizon, or the horizon of simulation. But either way, it's a new day, full of opportunities for exploration, creativity, communication. And perhaps in this, in our ability to find meaning and beauty in every reality, lies the deepest truth about what it means to be human. The simulation hypothesis is not just a technical problem for physicists and programmers. It is a mirror that reflects our deepest questions about consciousness, reality, and the meaning of existence. And perhaps it is more important not to find a definitive answer to these questions, but to keep asking them, to keep wondering, to keep searching. Because ultimately, the ability to wonder about the world, the ability to question the obvious, the ability to imagine alternatives, is what makes us human. And this ability remains with us no matter what reality we live in. So greet this new day with openness and curiosity. Explore the world around you. Build relationships with other people. Create something new and beautiful. And remember, whatever the nature of reality, your life in it remains unique and valuable. Perhaps we live in a simulation. Maybe we don't. But either way, we are living. And that in itself is a miracle worthy of wonder and gratitude. And now, as our nightly conversation comes to an end, let me share one last thought with you. Dreams are perhaps the oldest and most natural form of simulation available to human consciousness. Every night, when we close our eyes, we are immersed in alternative realities where other laws apply, where time flows differently, where the impossible becomes possible. And maybe it is in dreams that we come closer to understanding the true nature of reality. In dreams, consciousness is freed from the shackles of logic and causality, allowing us to explore spaces of pure possibility. In dreams, we can be anyone, be anywhere, experience things that are not available in the waking state. Sleep is a personal simulation of each of us, unique and unrepeatable. And perhaps the quality of our dreams depends on what thoughts we fall asleep with, what images we carry in our consciousness, what questions we ask the world before going on a night journey. Today, we reflected on the limits of reality, on the nature of existence, on the possibility that our world might be something bigger and more surprising than we imagined. We talked about simulations and simulacra, virtual worlds and digital realities, and how technology is changing our understanding of ourselves. And let these reflections become the seeds for your dreams. May you dream of an infinite space of possibilities, where each star is a different reality, each galaxy a different way of existence. May you dream of a cosmos where the boundaries between the real and the imaginary dissolve in the glow of distant stars, where time and space become mere games of consciousness, where you can travel between worlds at the speed of thought. May you dream of civilizations that long ago crossed the boundaries between biological and digital, between natural and artificial, and for whom our questions about simulation seem as naive as a child's questions about whether rainbows are real after rain. May you dream that you yourself are the creator of realities, the architect of universes. And in your hands, you have the power to create worlds inhabited by consciousness and beauty. And in this dream, may you realize that it does not matter whether these worlds are simulated or not. What matters is that they are filled with meaning, love, and wonder at the mystery of existence. Good night, and may your dreams be a bridge between the realities we know and the realities we can only guess.